uploaded back with another video just for you. So if you're a college football fan, go ahead and hit that like and subscribe button. It is a very long off season, but I'm here to get you through it. Don't forget to check out our Patreon page. A lot of time and effort going into that. And I call my Patreons the shot callers because I let them call the shots. We also have a great website designed and created by Joey Foster, 8 great writers led by our head writer Michael Walker. And I can't forget about our merchandise store. A lot of great stuff over there. Today I wanted to talk about how the SEC will look once Oklahoma and Texas officially join the SEC. And I gotta give a special shout out to Edward for giving me this video idea. So we already know that Oklahoma and Texas are going to the SEC, right? Well, how is the SEC gonna look? And how is the SEC schedule gonna look? Well, I really like Edward's idea. Not only for pods, but the teams that are in each of those pods. It makes too much sense. I really like this. And there's a lot of issues that this particular pod system would solve. So first, let's look at the pods real quick. First, the SEC Central pod. You would have Alabama, Auburn, Tennessee, and Vanderbilt. Now the SEC West pod, you'd have Arkansas, Missouri, Oklahoma, and Texas. The SEC South pod, LSU, Mississippi State, Ole Miss, and Texas A&M. And finally, the SEC East pod. You have Florida, Georgia, Kentucky, and South Carolina. Now, there's a lot of issues that I think these particular pods would solve. The first issue is Missouri in the SEC East. Yes, I think that's an issue. I think Missouri does not belong in the SEC East. I think it makes no sense whatsoever. I think Missouri needs to be in a West Division or a West pod. And that's exactly what this would do for Missouri. Now, the second thing that these pods would do, it would keep all major rivalries intact, like your Alabama, Auburn, Tennessee, Vanderbilt, Oklahoma, Texas, Ole Miss, Mississippi State, Texas A&M, LSU, Texas A&M, Ole Miss, Georgia, Florida. So all the major rivalries would still be intact, guaranteeing those teams to play each other every single year. Obviously, the geography makes sense, and I think these pods are evened out based on difficulty. I don't think there would be any dominating divisions. And I think this would actually help out recruiting. And one big thing that does not get talked about enough as far as being an issue is, I think this solves the issue of the SEC teams having too many home games every single year. Look, I'm not debating if the SEC is the best conference. I do think that they're arguably the best conference in the nation. But if you look at their schedules are not as difficult as the SEC makes them out to be. If you really look at the SEC schedules as far as how they're done right now, really you'll see that teams only have 4 road games. Sometimes a team here and there will grab 5 road games, and really only Vanderbilt ever gets stuck with 6 road games. And for example, my team, West Virginia, we are guaranteed to have 5 or 6 road games per year. So basically what I'm saying is, for the most part, the bigger brands, the bigger schools that represent the SEC the most, they do get sort of protected with those schedules. Like I said before, I'm not debating whether the SEC is the best conference. They are arguably the best conference in the nation. A lot of people would argue the Big Ten, the SEC. What I'm saying is their schedule protects their bigger brands. For instance, last year, the team that had the toughest schedule was Arkansas. This year, the toughest schedule is going to be Vanderbilt. They have 6 road games this year. But your Alabamas, Georgias, your Ole Misses, your A&Ms, your bigger brands that bring in the most money, have the best chances of getting into the playoffs, they get protected for the most part. Now, I will say this year, Alabama gets a road trip to Texas, which shocked the heck out of me because I'm not used to seeing an SEC team going on the road in an out-of-conference game in a Power 5 situation. Same thing with Ole Miss going on the road to Georgia Tech. That's a joke of a road game, honestly. So it helps to keep down the level of parity and protect your bigger brands. Last year, what game did Alabama lose in the regular season? A road game to Texas A&M. Well, the thinking is, well, if we lessen those chances and give them fewer road games, then they have less opportunities to slip up and miss the playoffs. So whether you want to admit it or not, road games matter the most, and they are the most difficult games to win. So if you lower the amount of road games, then you lessen the chances of those teams losing. So breaking it down, here's how the schedule would look like. Instead of 4 out-of-conference games like they have now, that would shrink down to 3 out-of-conference games. And the reason you do that is because the math just wouldn't add up if you stuck with 4 out-of-conference games. You'd have 3 games within your pod. One year you'd have 2 home and 1 away, and then the next year you'd have 1 home and 2 away. So you're up to 6 games. After that, you get 2 games out of each of the other 3 pods for a total of 6 more games. 1 home and 1 away for each of these pods in a rotation. Same with the in-pod games, the 2 home and the 1 away. That's going to be a rotation. Well, the 2 games you play out of the other 3 pods, that'll be on rotation as well for a total of 6 games. With that setup, you'd literally be guaranteed of playing everybody in the entire SEC conference in 2 years. That may seem a little much, but if the Big 12 can play each other within their own conference every year, then I think the SEC can play every team within the conference every 2 years. And not only would it guarantee that everybody plays everybody within 2 years, but it would also guarantee that each team would get a home game against every single SEC opponent within 4 years. Because remember, it is on a rotation. 1 year you get 2 teams out of each pod. The next year you get the other 2 teams out of each pod. One's home, one's away, but it also guarantees that you have a road game with every single team in the SEC conference within 4 years. And I think that's what makes this fair. And I think their schedule difficulty will go higher. Because let's face it, you'd much rather have a home game against Alabama than a road game against, say, an Arkansas or a Tennessee or an LSU. Because let's face it, we all know that the best chances of a good team getting upset is when they go on the road. So to try to give you a clear idea of how this would look, I picked an SEC team at random, and I'm going to give you their schedule based on these criteria. And the team that I chose was Tennessee. Okay, let's say that Texas and Oklahoma join the SEC by 2023. Here's what a Tennessee schedule could look like in 2023. Now, I dropped UConn out of their out-of-conference because their out-of-conference would shrink from 4 to 3. So the 3 out-of-conference games would be at BYU, that's their Power 5 opponent, Austin Peay at home, that's their FCS opponent, and UTSA at home, that's their Group of 5 opponent. Here's how their SEC schedule would look like. First, they'd get at Alabama, that's a pod game. Then out of the SEC West, they'd get Arkansas at home. Then out of the SEC South, they'd go on the road to Mississippi State. Then out of the SEC East, they go on the road to Kentucky. Then back to an in-pod game, a home game against Auburn. Then out of the SEC South, a home game against LSU. Then out of the SEC East, a home game against Florida. Then out of the SEC West, a road trip to Oklahoma. And finally, their rivalry game against in-pod opponent Vanderbilt. Now we move on to 2024 because these are on rotations. So according to this, in 2023, they had the 2 home and the 1 away within pod. Well, in 2024, it'd be the opposite. It would be 1 home and 2 away. So here's what their schedule could look like in 2024. I had to drop Oklahoma out of their out-of-conference because Oklahoma would be in conference. So I replaced Oklahoma with Michigan State. So they start off the season with a home game against Michigan State, or it could be a neutral site, then a home game against Group of 5 Kent State, then a home game against Group of 5 against UTEP. Then here's what their SEC schedule would look like. First, a road trip to in-pod opponent Auburn, then a road trip to SEC East Georgia, then a home game against SEC West Missouri, then another home game against SEC South Ole Miss, once again another home game against SEC East South Carolina, then a road trip to SEC South Texas A&M, another road trip to SEC West Texas. They come back home for an in-pod game against Alabama at home, and then finally the rivalry game on the road to Vanderbilt. So we see in 2023 they have 5 road games, and in 2024 they also have 5 road games. So y'all let me know in the comments section what you think about this suggestion, and if you would make some changes, what would be those changes? I really look forward to your comments on this particular subject. That's all I got for you for this show. Like and subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you on my next show.